There's long eyelashes. Oh, I want to wish everyone a good holiday with the 4th of July weekend coming up. On Saturday, I'm going to be leaving for a trip for Holocaust educators. So this is going to be a group of teachers, high school teachers who are in private schools and public schools, and me, learning about the Holocaust by traveling in Berlin and Warsaw and Krakow and getting to visit some of the camps and getting to visit some of the memorials and the museums and getting to see the public displays that are a way of educating the public and reminding the public of the sins of the past. I'm not doing this to learn about how bad those people were over there or to learn about how bad those people were back then, but to kind of understand the general human condition of how pride in our own identity, our own ethnicity, our own religion, our own nationality can become very destructive. And as we're approaching the Independence Day weekend, as we're taking pride in our nation and feeling patriotic, I think it's important to take time to look at how it is that that can turn and become ugly. So I'll be coming back from my trip and talking more about what I learned. But this is something I've been thinking about and reading about for a long time. And all of us have seen many movies and read books about that period of history, about the Holocaust. So I think as I look back to when it was that maybe I first started to understand how important this issue was to me in college, which is many decades ago. And I remember very little about things that long ago and about college specifically. I remember this one professor that I had. He was teaching philosophy, which was not my major, but I found it interesting. He was short and he had kind of this interesting Abraham Lincoln beard and he had this accent. And I can remember one time him talking to us about Austria. He was from Austria. And as he was talking about Austria, he began to say that he was aware that the people of Austria were not made to feel accountable, responsible for what happened during the Holocaust in the way that they should have. That he felt that people focused on Germany and what Germany had done and how Germany was responsible for the Holocaust, but that he felt that Austria was just as responsible as Germany, but had never been made to face up or to feel like they needed to feel responsible for it. And what we know as we study history is that Poland and the Soviet Union at the time, Russia, and France with the Vichy French, and Spain and Italy all had these oppressive governments that were involved in this massive extermination of people because of their faith, because of their disability, because of their sexual orientation. Many countries were involved in this endeavor and involved in an enthusiastic way. So it's not to think about those people back then. It's not to think about that particular group of people who were part of that political community. It's to think about all of us and to realize how intrinsic this is in our ability as people to ignore the way God has called us to treat each other, to ignore the purpose that we're given, which is to love each other, and to fall so easily into our flawed nature of hate and fear and violence that so quickly escalates. Just a couple of books that I want to point out. A couple of years ago, a local rabbi recommended to me Darrow Horn, People Love Dead Jews, which is a horrible title. She herself said that she didn't think that they were going to keep this title. She just thought it was a provocative title to put on a manuscript. And the publisher decided, I guess, that it was going to sell books. So Darrow Horn, so this is a very recent look at anti-Semitism. It has a look across the world and across history, and really kind of getting us to think about the way in which Holocaust informs and misinforms our understanding of anti-Semitism. It looks at how people understand Elie Wiesel's book and how the title of the book wasn't originally Night. It looks at how people understand Anne Frank and how that's kind of a window into the and to the Holocaust that people prefer to other books like Elie Wiesel and others. Um, that's an interesting book, I think, to kind of really understand anti-Semitism today and how the Holocaust plays a role in people's understanding of anti-Semitism. A couple of years ago, Ken Burns came out with this documentary. Ken Burns and Lynn Novick and Sarah Botstein, The U.S. and the Holocaust. Ken Burns, of course, has done many amazing documentaries. So this looks at the ways in which the United States, particularly its laws against African Americans, its Jim Crow laws, influenced and was specifically studied by Nazis, and how eugenics laws and other things originated in the United States. It's really devastating and really very important, I think, if we think about how the Nazis were people back then and the Nazis were people in another place at another time. Um, there's been a lot of scholarship just recently. Rachel Maddow has a book called Prequel. She has a podcast called Ultra, and it's now in its second season, looking at the early 20th century and authoritarianism and fascism and Nazism in the United States, what a prominent movement it was in the United States and in other places that we don't think of. This is Charles Gallagher. He's a Jesuit up in Boston. Nazism of Copley Square, the forgotten story of the Christian front. About Father Charles Coughlin, the Roman Catholic radio priest, who more people listening to his radio program than any other radio program. It really is a devastating and surprising history that I did not know. Heather Cox Richardson does a letter every day, Letters from an American. She's got two books out, How the South Won the Civil War. She's got another one called Democracy Rising, I think. This looks at how the South lost the war and won the peace by expanding racism throughout the country, particularly in the Western states, and looking at, a really frank look at American history and about racism throughout our history. Isabel Wilkerson, this is kind of a bigger book, Caste, The Origins of Our Discontent. She looks at India's caste system and the Nazi laws that were restrictive of people based on their religion and other things, and the United States during Jim Crow. It really is a very detailed look at history and compares these different systems to say that it's not so much about race, it's not so much about a religion, it's about a caste system. And I think it's a really interesting, more complicated, more nuanced look, but also very detailed history. And if you're really trying to understand genocide in a global perspective, worse than war, Daniel Jonah Goldhagen really looks across history and across the globe, and he makes the statement that more people died in genocide in the 20th century than in the wars that happened, which is a remarkable statement. But to say that so many governments targeted and attacked and killed and tried to eliminate vast portions of their populations, and that the destruction was even greater than those wars that happened between nations. So I want to just think a little bit about how our understanding of our love of our country is something that we really need to be a little careful about. I want us to think about how patriotism is a word to think about in terms of when we love our country. That patriotism is when we have maybe pride, but also that we just love our country. We understand our country as it is, not as we want it to be. We understand our country with its flaws. We understand that there are many people other than us, different from us in our country, and that we love it as it is. To think about this from a different angle, to use the word nationalism, that nationalism is fearing diversity. That nationalism is not quite understanding the country as it is, but as you think it should be. That nationalism is about xenophobia. Xenophobia, the fear of things that are different, the fear of people who are different, the fear of people who are foreign. Patriotism is about love. Nationalism is about fear. It's about stoking fear. It's about promoting fear of people who are different. People who are citizens of your country, people who are living in your country not as citizens, but who are a part of what your country is nonetheless. A nation of immigrants, the United States is, and yet there are people who don't like that about America. They don't think of that as what they want America to be. They're nationalists. And when they think about their nation, they're thinking very narrowly about who they want that to be. And it's not foreigners, it's not people who are different from them, and it's about fear of people who are different. Nationalism has this idea that we should all be a specific ethnic type. That's what the Nazis wanted. They wanted an Aryan race. There are people in every country, there are certainly people in the United States, who have this nationalist idea that this country has a specific ethnic group that should be superior, that should be in charge, that should be thought of as first-class citizens. People of specific ethnic, people of specific racial and religious backgrounds, and other ways in which people are thought to be a part of your own group and who are thought to belong. Nationalism is about hate and lies. When you talk about how people from this country or that country, people from this religious group or that socioeconomic group are different, how they're not as good as us, that's a lie. When we denigrate people of a specific group, we're lying about them. We're telling a lie that says that we are better than them, that we're good, and they're less than us. It's hate and lies towards ethnic, religious, and other minority groups. Nationalism is anti-democratic. It doesn't want those people to have a say. It doesn't want those people to be here, let alone allow them to have a voice in our society. Nationalism is anti-democratic. Nationalism is about concentrating power. It's about an anti-democratic, oppressive way of organizing your country. Christian nationalism is just as bad as nationalism and is trying to say that it's Christian, so therefore it must be good. You can't just put the word Christian in front of something and decide that that makes it good. Just because somebody says they're a Christian, just because somebody says that they want to have a Christian nation, doesn't make it good. Nationalism is hate, it's lies, it's intolerance, and Christian nationalism is even worse because you're saying you want a nation that's there for people like you who believe like you, which is just the opposite of the way this nation was founded. It's laughable to think that people miss this all the time, that this is a place of religious freedom. And there are people who insist that they want to impose religion. They want to have the 10 Commandments in every classroom. In public schools, that's against our basic religious freedom to have the government sponsoring and promoting a particular faith, a particular scripture from a particular point of view. We don't want to have a Christian nation. We want to be Christians because of our own free will, and that's what America stands for. It's not to say that we want to impose our religion. Luther talks about this. He talks about the two kingdoms. He talks about how we as people of faith understand the way in which there is a secular society and the way in which there's a spiritual society. Luther didn't have our modern understanding of the separation of church and state, but he was a part of the progress towards restricting the ability of the church to control the rest of the society. He understood that there was legal authority and there was spiritual authority. So all that just to say that we want holidays where we remember our nation's history, where we celebrate our country, to be about patriotism and not about nationalism. We need to understand that places in the world, if we look at them, that the genocide, the hatred, the oppression, the devastation that comes is by people beginning to talk about how proud they are about themselves and how superior they feel towards others. So let's be careful about that. When we think about our religion and how important our religion is to us, when we think about our nation and how much we love the values of our nation, not to let that descend as it can so quickly into hate, into lies, into superiority. So I'll be coming back from my Holocaust education trip and telling people more about what I saw there and what I learned, and asking you to think about how we all need to play a part in understanding the way in which that history should inform the decisions we make today. So I thank you for your time.